So next, let's talk about the eccentric cluster of disorders. So there are going to be 3 disorders here, and some of the features that you'll see that are common to these are oddness and awkwardness. We talked on Monday about how problems with social relationships are common throughout these disorders, but it's going to be especially true for these eccentric cluster disorders. So a lot of times folks with these eccentric disorders, I think I mentioned the other day, might just be described as being kind of weird people, unusual people. We'll begin with schizoid personality disorder. And so one central characteristic here is that these folks lead pretty solitary lives. They don't really have many friends, if any. And even when they do have relationships with other people, they aren't very close relationships. So they're very much emotionally detached from others. And this actually has a few characteristics in common with certain forms of autism, but there is an important distinction to be made there because autism is genetically, it's more clearly genetically influenced, whereas the belief is that schizoid personality disorder is going to be the result of a combination of genetics and environmental factors. We'll talk more about causes toward the end of lecture today. So another thing that we see with these schizoid personality disorder folks is that they don't seem to get much pleasure from anything. So they might have some hobbies and some things that they like to do, but they don't really get excited about anything. Even their favorite foods, their favorite movies and games, they'll do these things, but they just appear kind of numb, emotionally numb would be a good way of describing it. They can be kind of inept or clumsy in social relationships, so they'll stumble over their own words. And so this can just produce a lot of problems communicating with other people because they'll be trying to say something and they just really can't get it out. And it causes a lot of anxiety, and it can make the other person who they're trying to talk to kind of uncomfortable as well. So I mentioned that they don't really get much pleasure from sensory experiences, and they actually don't have much of a reaction to unpleasant events either. So like I said, emotional numbness is really central to this one. So if something bad happens, they just think, oh well. Any questions about this one? All right. So the next one I'm going to talk about has a very similar name. So don't get these two confused. So this is schizoid personality disorder, and then we have schizotypal personality disorder. And some researchers believe that this one might have some common genetic markers with schizophrenia, but it's still kind of unclear at this point what that relationship is. I like to use the example of Johnny Depp's portrayal of Willy Wonka in the more recent version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, although my favorite is the old Gene Wilder one. So these folks are very high anxiety people in regard to their social relations. They tend to avoid others. There are some common elements between schizotypal and schizoid. So they'll be kind of reclusive. They don't leave the house all that much. they don't conform to many social norms. So they might have very odd styles of dress. They'll wear what they want to wear, even if they get some odd looks or comments from other people. They are often suspicious of others. And I imagine that this is really made worse by the fact that they're not adhering to social norms, so they're getting a lot of odd looks and reactions from other people. People with schizotypal personality disorder tend to hold some, what you might call unusual beliefs. So they'll believe in ESP, psychic powers, or magic, or aliens, things like that. And finally, they tend to be fairly disorganized in their patterns of thinking and speaking. So just like we saw with the schizotypal folks, it's hard for them to communicate with others because they have these rather abstract thoughts and beliefs. And so it can be hard for them to find common ground for a conversation with another person. Any questions about schizotypal? So the easiest way that you can use to remember the difference between these, because they are pretty similar, schizoid and schizotypal, is that the schizoid people are just they're quiet and emotionally numb, whereas these people will have they'll have like regular and strong emotions. So let's see, the last disorder in this eccentric cluster is paranoid personality disorder. And so you all should know what paranoia is. As you might expect from the name, these folks are extremely distrustful of others. They don't want to take anyone at their word. They often view social events as being very threatening. I think I've mentioned fear of negative evaluation in here before, and so that's something that you would see in these folks. They think that, as you might expect from the paranoia aspect of it, they think that other people are out to get them. They tend to be very resentful, and they'll often seek revenge or retribution for perceived wrongs, even if it's just a minor thing and somebody else doesn't even know that they offended this person. These people really take it very personally. They are often very argumentative and hostile. So you're going to see that hostile attributional bias that we talked about back in the social interaction chapter in full force in these folks. And finally, they tend to be prone to pathological levels of jealousy. So I'm guessing it would not be fun to be in a romantic relationship with one of these people. They are known to be more likely to engage in stalking behaviors. So they'll like rifle through their significant other's personal things, looking for evidence of some type of betrayal or infidelity. They'll just randomly show up at where the person works just to check up on them and make sure that they're not being unfaithful. So, any questions about this one? All right. So finally we have the anxious cluster of disorders. So some central characteristics of this one involve being nervous, fearful, or distressed. So we mentioned anxiety before for other disorders, but it's really a central characteristic to these. first one we'll go over is avoidant personality disorder. And so these folks have, well, they feel very inadequate. They don't feel like they have the ability to do anything with any level of success. So they really lack confidence, self-confidence. They're extremely sensitive to criticism. So even if you're trying to provide one of these people with some constructive criticism, just give them a little advice, they are often just really taken aback by that. They think it's a personal slight against them. A lot of times they will restrict their activities in order to try to avoid embarrassment. So they do get really easily embarrassed. So they wouldn't want to take part in anything like intramural sports or any type of competition because, like I said, they lack self-confidence and they're very likely to perceive themselves as being a failure even if they just stumble a little bit. And, you know, nobody's perfect, but these people don't really seem to accept that. And finally, they have very low levels of self-esteem. And so they're probably going to be a little bit more prone to suffering from depression. Does anybody know the term that's used to describe when someone has more than one disorder at the same time? What's that? Oh, no, multiple personality disorder. That's a totally different thing, which I actually wasn't really planning to talk about during this class, just because it's not strictly a personality disorder. It's kind of well, I won't go into too much detail on it. Was somebody else saying something about that term that's used to describe when people have more than one disorder at a time? So it's called comorbidity. And so, yeah, so if someone has avoidant personality disorder and they're experiencing depression, that would be a high level comorbidity between those.